about money. And last week when I said we were talking about money, I don't remember if it was you, Jill, or somebody else in the front said, "What money?" I was like, "Yep, no, I completely relate to that." In fact, I'll share a little bit more about my story. But one of the things that we learned last week is that money is amoral, not immoral. Right? Money is immoral. It's like money is morally neutral. There is no good, bad about money. But what we saw in our text last week is that our money reveals something about us. It reveals what we care about, what our hearts are attached to. And so sometimes when we start to talk about money, we get a little bit antsy because for some reason our hearts are attached to money probably more than they should be. Okay? So we get real uncomfortable. And I got to tell you, I'm going to poke and prod a little bit more today. And it's going to be maybe in some areas that might make you squirm a little bit. But at the end of the day, my goal is to inject hope and financial peace, and also to inject maybe a spirit of generosity where one cannot be birthed right now. So that's my goal. So before we start talking about our money, I want to talk a bit about my money and just be transparent with you about what's going on in my life and my own financial journey, just to give you a little bit of context, okay? So when Lisa and I got married, this is now, in June, it'll be 19 years. I can't believe it. I was working an entry-level job at Hertz Rent-A-Car. I was, manager, trainee. I was not making very much money, and shortly after that, I transferred and I started to work at State Farm, and I worked at an entry-level call center job. Hated every moment of it, okay? Hated every moment of it. So at the time, I was the only one working. Lisa was finishing up her degree. She was busy being pregnant and then being a mom. And so we were a single-income household, and I was making, pretty close to minimum wage, and so money was incredibly tight. I remember, it's funny how certain memories stick with you. And I remember pretty soon after we got married, something happened to Lisa's red Dodge Stratus. And so we took it into the shop, and it was going to be several $1,000s to fix. And this was shortly after we were married, and we're just figuring out life and how to live. And this was money that we did not have. But we needed the car to work because we needed to live. And so I this question hit me, and it's funny to think back about this because I was just so naive. I went in my mind, I get, what do people do when they don't have money to fix their car? What do they do? And then I asked the guy behind the counter, what do people do when they need to have their car fixed but they don't have the money to do it? And that's when he handed me an application for a credit line. Okay? And this would have been, with the exception of student loans, my first time borrowing. And at the time, I remember thinking, okay, this must be what people do. They borrow money when they don't have it, and that kind of became the way that we lived. And so at the idea, I had no idea anything about interest rates and any of this stuff. And so I just knew I needed my car fixed. It was going to cost several $1,000s. I didn't have it. I guess I need to borrow it, okay? So what would end up happening, unfortunately, is that this trend would continue in our life. There would be another thing that would come up that we couldn't afford, and so we would put it on a credit card. And then there would be something that we didn't need, but we wanted. We couldn't afford it, but we thought we could swing the monthly payments, and so we put it on a credit card or some sort of financing, because monthly payments, okay, we could do that. But if you're resonating to part of my story right now, you know exactly what happens next. This debt continues to accrue, and the monthly payments continue to accrue. And the way that the system works, it's built for you to never pay them off, pretty much, because the interest rates are so astronomical. And so if you're just paying minimum monthly payments, you're going to be paying for years. And so this happened until we found ourselves massively in debt. And so between credit cards, car payments, school loans, and there were times when we couldn't afford food, diapers, so we would just be like, okay, credit card. And so we would just put all this stuff on credit card. All right. Now I tell you this because I want you to know that I know. I still know. Okay? I'm still climbing myself out of this hole. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. So maybe this is something that you can relate to, And maybe, again, as I say, you're squirming a little bit. Now, if you're not, then you're ahead of the game. And we'll get to you in just a little bit, and we'll talk primarily to you next week. And we'll talk about the why we're doing this sermon to begin with, okay? So I was looking up statistics on debt this week, and I read that 80 to 90% of every single generation in America is carrying some form of non-mortgage debt, okay? And I don't want to alarm you, but I need to tell you the truth, that if you owe people more money than you have, then you're poor, okay? Even if your income is good, you can have good income and still be poor because all the money that you're making is owed to other people. So it's not even your money. You're paying it out, right? So Lisa and I, glory to God, are in a much better place right now, but we are still paying for the poor decisions we made in our 20s and 30s. We're still digging ourselves out of the financial hole. So you need to know I'm still poor, right? I'm still paying off debt, And I'm not saying that to say, oh, poor me, poor pastor. I'm just letting you know, like, I'm here with you. And God has been gracious and given me wisdom and some things that have helped me over the years, which we're going to talk about. So I just want you to know that as we move forward today, I'm going to be sharing some wisdom from Scripture that I've learned over the years that has helped me dramatically. And this is going to be a different type of sermon than I normally preach. I have a text and I move through it. And this one is a little bit more topical. And I was doing some research on Proverbs this week, and I read that Proverbs is supposed to be read. You're supposed to look up the verses that are pertinent to what you need. In other words, it's not necessarily meant to be read as a book. You can, in order, you can just find the ones that you need or that the topic that you need, and find wisdom from there. So that gave me a little bit of that helped my conscience a little bit as I was kind of looking into this, but. So we have all this topic of debt and money and all this other stuff, and maybe you're uncomfortable right now, and that's fine. That's just part of talking about money, is you're just going to be uncomfortable. But the question is, what does any of this have to do with God? And this was a question I found myself asking a lot this week, because so far this sermon is a TED Talk, right? So far this sermon is a TED Talk. You could hear this at any financial stuff that you could talk to. But we said last week that money is a matter of heart. And so when we're talking about debt and money that we owe, there's this intricate connection between our hearts and what's going on, and it's this big old convoluted mess inside of us. So it's not just as simple. So there's more going on there. Money is this very spiritual thing, and when we have debt, there's a spiritual component to it. Okay, I also noticed this week that all throughout Scripture, God has a deep care for those who are poor. Me. Maybe you, okay? Psalm 140. I know that the Lord secures justice for the poor, and he upholds the cause of the needy, okay? God has a heart for poor people. He has a heart for ministering to poor people, all right? This is part of who he is. And again, if you owe more money than you have, then you're poor. We're poor. This is us. And so part of this sermon, I feel like, is a ministry to those of us in the church who are struggling a little bit. So, I look in Galatians 2, and the apostles are going like, all right, Paul, you go minister, but there's one thing we don't want you to forget as you go minister. And he goes, they asked us to remember the poor, the very thing I was eager to do. So part of this sermon to me feels like a ministry to poor, myself and those of us in here who are struggling with debt. And again, if this is not you, congratulations, you're ahead of the game. We're going to talk a little bit about you later and more next week. But again, statistically speaking, 80 to 90% of the people in here are kind of going, yep, you're hitting me, you're scratching where I hit, so to speak. Okay, so one of the things that I hope this sermon will accomplish is that through the wisdom that we find in the Scripture, it will end up helping us get out of maybe some financial situation that is theirs. Okay, so here's another dynamic, big one. Because next week we're going to talk about generosity and giving. And in order to talk about generosity and giving, I want to share with you a story about my own life. Okay, one of the things that happened to me, I was ministering at another church prior to coming here, and this was when I was even more poor than I am now, so to speak. And the leadership at the time started what was called a capital campaign, which is where they have experts come in because they wanted to build a building, right? And so they had experts come in, and the experts in these consultants were really good about figuring out how to get as much money out of the people in the church as possible in order to build the buildings. And however you feel about that, it's whatever. I won't share you with my feelings about that, but you can maybe guess a little bit. Okay, so they have in these campaign consultants. They're like, they're laying it on thick and sacrifice and give more. And like, I think certainly there's a role for sacrificial giving. Talk about it next week. But Lisa and I and my family, we were in no position to financially, to give. Like, no, we were like paying off debt. We could barely live, right? And I remember in that moment as they're kind of going, give sacrificially, give till it hurts, and we got to get this building so more people and blah, blah, blah. I just remember feeling this overwhelming sensation of shame and guilt because of the poor decisions that I had made. I guess I must be the only person in this church who's in debt. And so furthermore, I just can't give, right? I just don't have anything to give right now. So there was this guilt attached to it. And I have nothing to give, and I'm like, oh, I feel like dirt. And so I got to thinking about this sermon series. And next week, again, we're going to look in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, talking about generosity and giving. And I just went, and having a generous heart, and I just went, there are going to be a bunch of people in our church who love to be generous, but because of poor decisions that you have made and that I have made in the past, this talk about generosity and giving is just going to bring with it all sorts of guilt and shame. So how do we talk about this? I just think it's important to be open and honest and transparent and to kind of go, there's going to be people who are feeling this, and when you talk about generosity and giving, you're going to be like, I just feel like dirt. I can't. And so part of because I know God cares about people who are poor, part of because I want people to have peace financially, I want people to be able to be generous. That's my goal in trying to get better financially, is I want peace, right, financially, and also like I want to be able to be more generous than I'm able to right now. Like I give and I can give, but I want to be able to do that more. And so like this is where I'm at. So my fear is that if we moved on to talk about generosity without talking about the elephant in the room, then the entire sermon is going to fall on deaf ears to 90% of the church. Okay, so this is the reason why. And so I was talking with the elders this week, and we were in agreement that having a sermon aimed at having a biblical understanding of managing money and debt is going to be a good thing for our church, a ministry to the people in our church, and it's going to be ultimately an incredibly helpful thing. Because money is a spiritual thing, isn't it? It's not just about the money. There's more going on here. And then lastly, I'm just giving you the rationale behind the why. Look what Paul said last week. He said, if we have food and clothing, then we will be content. In other words, if you have just the basic needs of life, we should just be content with that instead of always wanting more and wanting more and wanting more and wanting more. Last week we talked about contentless, or being content with godliness and searching after Him, and that's where your heart's going to find true content. And I think the contentment here is talking about some semblance of peace. Like, just take a deep breath. You have your food and your clothing, and so we can just say, like, if the basic needs of our life are taken care of, then we should be content with that. But what happens, and this is the question, what happens when we're having trouble with food, and we're having trouble with clothing, and we're having trouble paying our rent or our mortgage and our bills to keep the lights on, the basic necessities? It's going to be a very difficult thing to do. So it's going to be difficult to find financial peace, and more than that, it's going to be difficult to be generous if we're barely making ends meet and we can't even afford our basic necessities. Are you tracking with me so far? This is I've never preached a sermon like this in almost 10 years of being here, but maybe I think it's about time. Okay, so in order to find some peace with our money, to find it within ourselves, this desire to be generous, let's talk about money. And my hope is that we find hope here. First things first. I'm going to show you a verse, and you need to know because I study Scripture for a living. It's basically what I do. You need to know that the verse I'm about to read, Jesus is not talking about managing our finances. He's going to be talking about something very different. He's talking about the cost of discipleship. But I want you to see the basic wisdom in the mind of Jesus. Because Jesus says this. He says, "For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it. Okay? Again, Jesus is talking about counting the cost of discipleship. In other words, before you come to follow him, what is it going to cost you to follow him? And don't just, do this willy-nilly. But I want you to see the simple wisdom and kind of going, this is basic everyday wisdom coming from Jesus. He's going, look, if you want to build a tower, who in their right mind would start building a tower without figuring out if you had the money to finish it? Wouldn't you want to plan ahead and kind of go, well, yeah, we're halfway done, can't do it, so I probably should have planned better. So there's simple wisdom to be found here in simply planning ahead, and I want you to see this coming from Jesus. Okay? So there's basic common wisdom here in regard to planning where our money goes. In other words, it is a good thing to sit and think ahead. Think ahead about our money. Listen to this proverb from Solomon. He says this: "The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty." The word hasty here means to make a last-minute decision. Now, have you ever made a hasty financial decision? Now, have you ever went to a car lot and been like, I'm just gonna look at them, and then you end up driving away with the car? You're like, what have I done? This is called a hasty decision. Okay, this is called making a decision that is spur of the moment. And what does Solomon say? He says, when you live a life of making hasty financial decisions, then there will be poverty. Okay, I've done it. You've done it, I'm guessing. So if we buy things sporadically with no forethought to whether or not we need it, we can afford it, or if we buy this, we will not be able to buy groceries or diapers later, then this is not a wise thing to do. Okay, is basically what he's saying. So the idea here is to plan where our money is going to go. And this is where we need to bring up the big B word. And it's not that B word, it's a different B word. Okay, and that B word is budgeting. Budgeting, and let me just rip off the Band-Aid and give you a very simple explanation for budgeting. Budgeting is, first of all, knowing what you have and what you don't have, and then planning where what you have will go ahead of time. This is budgeting. It's so simple, okay? Knowing what you have, and it's really, it's not very simple when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, but this is the basic definition of budgeting. Knowing what you have and then planning ahead of time of where it's going to go. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I want us to see this at the very beginning. That if we don't know what we have and we haven't made a plan for what it's going to go compared to what we're going to need to spend, then this is not a wise thing to do. So if you have never budgeted before, the first time is a lot like going to the dentist after you haven't been in decades. It's going to reveal to you lots of problems that you have, either, well, in this case, with your teeth. It's going to be embarrassing, and it's going to hurt in the beginning. And it's terribly humbling at first, but it is the best thing for you. After you rip off the proverbial Band-Aid of going to the dentist, what do? They examine the problems, you eat a slice of humble pie, then you begin to get things right. If you have never budgeted before, if it's been a while, if you started a budget 20 years ago and you're like, I'll get back to it sometime, and you're coming back to it, it's going to be a little humbling at first to go, this is where I'm at. Ugh, I thought I knew where I was at, but this stinks to hear, right? So, but it is the best thing to do, because if you make hasty decisions without planning ahead, you will end up in poverty. All right. So that's the first thing that we want to lay the groundwork on. Knowing what you have, planning where it's going to go. What about debt? What if you're in debt up to your eyeballs? Is it a sin to take out debt? Turns out the Bible doesn't have a lot to say about debt, but it does have some things to say about debt. Okay, so we're going to start in the book of Romans. And for context here, in this particular section of Romans, Paul is talking about Christian behavior. The first part of Romans, particularly 1 through 8, he's saying, this is the gospel. This is everything that you have good in Jesus. And then there's a little pause in 9 through 11 where he talks about where the Jewish people fit into the plan of God. And then in chapter 12, he starts talking about, he says, now in light of the mercy of God, now offer yourselves as living sacrifices. In other words, in light of the gospel, this is now how you should live. This is the practical outpouring of your life and how believers should live. And so we're in a section where this is talking about how believers should behave because of what God has done for us in view of God's mercy. You tracking? And there's a question that comes up, and the Roman people are like, should we keep paying taxes? I don't want to pay taxes anymore. Should Christians pay taxes? And then this is Paul's response. He says in Romans 13, "For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God," which is an interesting to talk about. I wish I could talk more about that whole other sermon for a whole other day. Attending to this very thing. And then what does he say? Verse 7, "Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed." Then he says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another, for the one who loves has fulfilled the law." So Paul says, pay taxes because the government is supposed to be doing the work of God in promoting justice and holding people accountable and keeping evil at bay. So pay taxes because they're the ones supposed to be doing that, all right? And then verse 8 really sticks out. "Oh, no one anything." Oh, now I feel like dirt, you know. And some people have taken this to say, "Oh, no one anything, so we should never take out debt." So is Paul saying we should never take out a loan, never borrow anything from anything? Does God forbid borrowing, excuse me? Is it a sin to borrow? I think that the answer is no, and the context gives us the reason why, okay? He's talking about paying what you owe. In other words, if you owe something, don't continue to owe it to them, pay them back. He's not taking about never taking out a debt. In this text, here's what we see. If we're just being honest with the text, saying, believers, if you owe somebody something, pay it back. That's the fruit of this text. Now, at this point of the sermon, so the big principle here is not to never borrow from somebody, but rather that the believer should always make good on his debts. Now, if you are a person who is no debt, you're going, "Tim's a jerk." And if you're a person who likes to take out debt, you're elbowing your spouse, saying, "See, I told you we should take out another loan." But let me just say this, and as we continue to talk about this idea of borrowing is not forbidden. Look what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5. "Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you." If it's a sin to borrow from somebody, why would Jesus command others to lend to those who need? It just doesn't make any sense. So we want to come out of these passages to see that it's not a sin to take out debt or to borrow. And while this is true, and again, while you may be elbowing your spouse or quietly in your mind going, "Woohoo, I'm off the hook, I just took out a giant loan," it may not be the wisest thing to do. Just because something is not sinful doesn't mean that it is not wise. And we're going to move back to Proverbs, and we're going to see this. He's going to be talking about debt, and he says this, and you will feel this as soon as you see it. "The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave to the lender." Okay? This is what is called an observational proverb. In other words, it's a statement of truth. I've seen this happen, and this is a true fact, okay? So he's making the point that debt, by its very nature, changes the relationship between you and the lender. By its very nature. So he likens the relationship to that of a slave to a master. A slave to a master. And he's saying this is something that anyone who is in debt will feel instinctively. Okay? When you are in debt, you are no longer free to do with your money what you want to do. Why? Because your money isn't your money. It is owed to somebody else, isn't it? Usually with a large interest rate attached to it. Have you, or furthermore, let's not talk about credit cards just yet. Let's talk about borrowing money from a friend or family member. Have you ever borrowed money from a friend or family member? It changed the dynamic of the relationship, didn't it? Okay? There's this feeling of being enslaved to the one that you've borrowed from. When I was in college, a buddy of mine sold me some subwoofers and an amp for the back of my car, and I didn't have the money at the time. And he was like, $400? And he's like, "Yeah, just pay me when you can." And instantly it changed the relationship. Okay. Now to him, I was somebody who owed him money, So to him, I was somebody who owed him money, and him to me was somebody that I owed money to that I didn't have that I needed to avoid. Right? I was poor. I was working at Papa John's. And so it was like he would call and be like, "Hey, Timmy, you got money for me?" And it got to the point where I would just stop answering his phone calls. I'm a jerk. I mean, I'm just being truthful with you. And I ended up paying him, but man, it was a pain in the butt, and it changed the relationship, okay? So maybe right now your life doesn't feel like your own because of the amount of debt that you're in. And this is that proverb in action. A borrower feels slave to a lender. This isn't even my life. My money comes in and it's immediately gone. I'm paying somebody who I owe. Now, commenters tell us that verse 7 in Proverbs 22 is meant to be paired with verse 16. Check this out. It says, whoever oppresses the poor, and this is a little bit of a confusing one, whoever oppresses the poor to increase his wealth or gives to the rich will only come to poverty. So one commentator suggests this paraphrase of the verse. One oppresses the weak to enrich himself, another gives to the rich only for poverty, with no future in sight but deeper poverty for himself. And again, suggesting that this should be read in the context of verse 7, in the context of the lender-debtor relationship, and the giving of the rich here isn't just like, hey, I want to give to the rich. It is the paying back of a debt. It is the outpouring of this debt-debtor or this lender-debtor relationship. So when he's talking about giving money to the rich here, he's saying, I'm meeting the demands of my wealthy creditor, okay? So they're saying that, or he's saying in this verse, the rich who charge exorbitant interest rates and lend to the poor only get richer, while those who make payments to the rich with interest are only going to go further into poverty. And so what we see is that the basic wisdom here is when we owe people money, we fall into a trap of making the rich richer while we keep ourselves in poverty. Okay? So what does this mean? It means that we should read these two verses together. That debt, now hear with me, you hear me say that debt is not a sin, but it is incredibly, incredibly unwise. So debt must only come as an absolute and totally last resort, and we should endeavor to get out of debt as quickly as possible. Now, I have made a rule for myself that I will never, ever go into any more debt with anyone. That's just a rule that I have made for myself, okay? Because we have found that this is true, that it is financially debilitating, isn't it? If you're living this, you know this is true. And it is emotionally demoralizing. It just beats you up every time that you think about it, okay? And Dave Ramsey likes to say, it's not until you get sick and tired of being sick and tired that you're willing to do something about it. So until you feel this, you're often going to stay where you're at, okay? So just some very practical things here. It's going to be very, very wise for you to be very wary, leery of, and afraid of those who are offering to lend you money, especially those who are offering to lend it to you quite easily. And nowadays, debt culture has been normalized. Did you know that debt, stay with me here, debt is a product. Debt is a product. And there's more money spent on marketing debt than on any other product in the United States. Billions and billions and billions of dollars marketing debt. And credit cards company make trillions of dollars off of debt. And so they spend billions of dollars on marketing to make debt normal. So debt is a product. When you borrow at interest, you are paying money to borrow. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that. So here are some tricky things that creditors do in order to get us to borrow more money. They've changed the term from credit limit to purchasing power. That's happened to me. Oh, my purchasing power has increased. Woohoo! No. Yeah, I can owe you more money. That's dumb. 0% interest teaser rates. So they'll give you a year of 0% no interest, and then they're buried in the fine print that it's going to skyrocket to 25% in a year, and any balance that you hold is immediately going to be backward-ended back into all of that debt. So all the money that you have put on that credit card is going to be charged with that 25% interest rate after the first year. Pre-approved offers. Woohoo! I won the lottery. No, they have considered you stupid enough to give money to. Okay, listen. These pre-approved letters are dumb. They make you feel like you're special, but you're not, okay? It's just a hook to get you to apply for credit cards that have high interest rates, low monthly payments, okay? I can't afford $12,000, but I can afford 3,000 payments of $12 for the next 50 years of my life, all right? So you go, I can't afford $1,000, but I can afford $25, okay? That feels manageable. Meanwhile, you do this one right after the other. Did you know that it would take almost 8 years to pay off $1,000 borrowed at 18% APR if you only make the minimum payments? 8 years for $1,000. And in the end, you will have paid $1,638 to borrow that $1,000 at the end of those 8 years, meaning you paid $638 to borrow $1,000. Okay, and multiply this times whatever debt you're in. That's just $1,000. Let's say that you're thousands of dollars in debt, and I mean you are just throwing money away through interest, and you're paying an exorbitant amount of interest in order to borrow money. So what do we begin to see? That debt is not a sin, but it is unwise. You could also say dumb, stupid, or idiotic. Okay, and the reason why I can say that is because I'm poor too. And so I can say that if there was a season in my life where I was dumb, stupid, and idiotic for taking out debt and not really thinking about the parameters of it. So debt may not be a sin, but man, it is a dumb thing to do, right? It keeps you in a slave relationship with the debtor who tries to keep you in debt as long as possible to make as much money for themselves as they can. Now, that may not always be the case with family or friends, but it's still going to change the relationship, all right? All right. So lastly, if this whole time you're coming on, this sermon isn't for me, like that's really actually quite awesome. It really is, because it means you've avoided the trap, which is an easy trap to fall into, okay? And so just a few things before we spend the entire week next week talking about giving and generosity. What does it say to those of us who are in a better financial position? Look what he says. Or look what John writes in 1 John 3. He says, but if anyone has the world's goods, if anybody has wealth or money, and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? One of the ways that we can show our love towards people, if you have the means to be able to give, is to give. And in so doing, we show love with other people. And what is the best way to help people in need? This is a tough one. But you'll see why it's so incredibly wise and why Jesus was so wise to say this in Luke chapter 6. He says, and if you lend to those whom you expect to receive, what credit it is to you, right? But he says, even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good, and then lend, expecting nothing in return. Amen. When you lend, do not expect to get it back, okay? Do not expect to do that. And what happens? When you give to not have anything in return, it loosens the grip that money has on you, and you avoid that slave-master relationship with somebody that you love. You give in order to show love, all right? Now, at the same time, believers, what did Paul say about giving money back to those who we owe money to? Give it back. And so if both people in the relationship and say, I'm giving without expecting a return, and if I say, I'm in deep, desperate need right now, and I need this just to be able to make ends meet, I'm going to borrow with the expect to return it to them and owe them. If both of them go into that situation, then the relationship is saved. You see? So there's wisdom to be had here. So we should be open-hearted and open-handed to those who are in true need, not expecting anything in return. And that is the best way to give, Jesus says. Because even sinners can give and expect to have money given back. So, that was a sermon. We're not done yet. Let's keep going. Practical help, okay? Especially if you are resonating with the sermon, you're like, oh, I feel like dirt right now. You might want to take notes for the next several minutes because it's going to be very practical, okay? So, the goal is to be able to get out of debt, to be able to meet our needs. And if we have more than that, to be able to give and be generous. This is the goal, not to hoard. We said last week when we're hoarding, this is a sign that our heart is too attached to the money. All right? So if you are hurting financially, the first thing that you need to know is that our church has funds available for those of you who are in need. There's our way, and this isn't something we talk about. We just can assume that we know. But our church, we have a budgeted account for those of you who are in need. So there is a short application that you'd have to fill out that would say, how did I get myself into this situation? Who does the payment need to be made to? Just questions like that. But you need to know that the person who gets this, it's on a need-to-know basis. So this isn't like spreading all around to like some committee and everybody in the church knows. It is like 2-3 people know max. Okay? The one who writes the check and maybe the elders and myself. Sometimes not even me. Okay? So if you're kind of going, I'm not going to be able to eat. I'm not going to be able to. Then we have an application and for you to fill out, and we would be more than happy to help you meet a need. Okay, so to pay a bill, to buy groceries, you need to know that your church family is here for you. All right. So next, sorry. I'm sorry to my sister who does not want to do this. Sorry, Dana, I just threw you under the bus. Start a budget. Start a budget. Now, we just have this back and forth. It's all in good fun, I hope. Sorry, Dana. Start a budget. Budgeting is what? Know what you have and plan where your money is going. Know what you have and plan where your money is going. I would highly, highly, highly recommend what is called a zero-based budget. It is to take your income minus your expenses, and that has to equal zero every single month, so that every dollar is spoken for, okay? Now, if you are a baby boomer, then you can use Quicken. Quicken is like your app of choice. You love Quicken. And this is a great way for you to manage your money and have a zero-based budget, okay? If you are a millennial or Gen Z or maybe even Gen X, then I would recommend 2 apps for you, 2 apps on your phone. The first one is called You Need a Budget, YNAB. This has single-handedly changed my financial picture more than anything that I've done in the history of managing my finances. And it has helped me get a grasp on my money, my cash flow, and everything like that. So You Need a Budget, YNAB. Dave Ramsey has an app called Every Dollar. That might be a good one too. Okay, so it has completely revolutionized our budgeting. And so listen, you will continue to be in the situation that you're in until you care enough to change. Okay, so start a budget, take stock of what you have, and then plan where you're going to spend your money. And you need to know, what did we say? That when you first started doing a budget, it is like going to the dentist after taking 20 years off. It's hard at the beginning. If you need help with particularly the You Need a Budget app, the first month is the hardest, and I would be more than happy to help you. You don't have to share any of your financial information with me, but I would be more than happy to help you get situated in that. It is awesome. All right, so You Need a Budget. So again, know what you have, plan where it's going to go, because otherwise you're just kind of shooting from the hip. All right, second, debt is unwise. Stop borrowing immediately. Make it up in your mind that I will not borrow another penny. Now, if you have to, you have to, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But can you do this? Are you sick of being where you're at? Make it up in your mind that you will stop borrowing money. Now, listen, if you are a financial person, especially if you're involved in real estate, then a lot of these rules get thrown out the window because, you can go into debt for real estate. I don't know anything about that stuff. I'm just talking about the average Joe, all right, who's taking out credit card debt, all right? So make it a rule in your mind that I will not take out any more debt. Only borrow if you must. And again, this is why budgeting first is important, because when you budget, you know what you can and cannot afford. Otherwise, you're just kind of like, I think I can. I've been able to make my payments until then. So when you're tempted to borrow money, ask yourself some questions. Do I need this or want this? Really? Okay? I can talk myself into needing a lot of things that I don't need, right? I'm really good at it. For a long part of my life, I was a master. I definitely need this, right? Okay. So be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself. There's a lot of stuff that you want that you don't need that you will talk yourself into needing. Is there a cheaper alternative so I will not have to borrow? Can I live a little bit differently now so that I can pay off my debt so that I can live a little bit differently later, okay? So is there a cheaper alternative that I can borrow? Can I go on Facebook Marketplace and find something, that's what I did, actually. I went on Facebook Marketplace and I bought a $100 lawnmower, even though there's a $900 one that I really, really need, okay? If you see me with a lawnmower, then hopefully I didn't borrow for it. Anyway, and then another, this all requires discipline. Is this something that I can wait for and save for it? Like, if I can afford to make payments on it, then can I afford to wait to make payments on it into my account and then save a year and then buy it? Okay? Again, right now, and this is just being honest with you, right now I would really, really love to buy a new car. Eventually, I'm going, not like a new one, but like a new used one. And I really want it, and I can swing the monthly payments right now. I could. I'm doing YNAB. I know what I can and can't afford. But I've decided to drive a piece of crap until I can pay for a different car. So I'm driving a 2003 Toyota Camry. Okay, it makes weird noises. Every time I go over a bump, I fear for my life. But I've made up in my mind that I will not go into debt. I will not go into debt, and so I will drive this until I can afford something better. Okay. Lastly, or kind of lastly, pay back what you owe. Make it up your mind to pay off your debts as quickly as possible. Okay. I would highly, highly, highly recommend the Dave Ramsey Financial Peace University. Highly recommend it. Okay. He recommends, and this is just to kind of, whet your appetite, he recommends something called the debt snowball. This entails paying off your like putting your debts in order of lowest to highest, disregarding interest rate, paying off the lowest one first, then taking the monthly payment that you paid, and then roll that into the next one, then roll that into the next one, then roll that into the next one. Okay? This is something that I've done, and when you begin to pay off debts, there's a momentum that builds with kind of going, woohoo! I ain't paying you anymore, you jerk. You're not my master anymore. And there's something really good feeling about that. Another thing that's available, and you have to be very, very careful about this, but there's something called Christian credit counselors. Okay, they will negotiate smaller interest rates on your credit cards. So going from like 25% to like 3% or 6% or something like that. All right. So, but don't jump into the debt consolidation. There's all sorts of traps. Make sure that the one that you choose is a nonprofit. Okay, a 501c3. Again, one that I know of is Christian Credit Counselors, and you can trust them. Okay. So, lastly, if you are in a good financial situation, be generous with those in need, not expecting anything in return. So all this stuff wraps up into one thing, and at the end of the day, the goal is to just to be content with what we have and to be able to be generous with what we have. Like that's my goal. Like I can be more generous now today than I could like 10 years ago, but I want to be able to be even more generous. I really do. Okay, and at the end of the day, when we are generous, we are mirroring the heart of God. We are mirroring the heart of God. Look what Paul writes in Colossians 2, and we're done now. So just last little tidbit. And you, who were dead in your trespasses, in the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having what? Having forgiven us all our trespasses by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. When we give and when we forgive debt, we are acting like Jesus. And now you can read something like this and go, yes, that's a great motivation for me to be able to do to others what Christ has done for me. Except he did it in a very real way that cost him everything. It cost him his life. We owed a debt of our life because of our sin, and Christ pays it for us. He cancels the debt. The debt is nailed to the cross. We don't owe it anymore because Christ has paid it on our behalf. And what amazing God we serve, who has canceled our debt, and so we can be free in him. All right, was that too bad? No, all right, it was long. I'm sorry. All right, but yeah, so we're going to sing More Precious Than Silver. I forget the next song, but we'll worship together. Let me pray for us. Father, and even in my mind right now, I'm bundled with anxiety. What will people think about a sermon on money and all this stuff? But Father, I just have to leave it in your hands. Father, I pray that this is a helpful sermon to those of us here who are struggling, to help us to be able to be content with the basic needs that we have and to be able to give generously. Thank you for giving to us so generously. We pray this in your name. Amen. All right. Let's go ahead and stand together.